Why did Kuma become a willing slave to the world government? And why did the world government so desperately want Jewelry Bonnie? If we look at all the information we have on Kuma, Bonnie, Vegapunk, the revolutionaries, and the world government, everyone's known motivations and histories, I think suddenly a very clear picture is formed of what likely happened to Bartholomew Kuma and how he ended up the way he is today, as well as how Bonnie's story developed in conjunction with his. Today we're going to be unraveling the truth behind Bartholomew Kuma and how he fell from a king to a slave, and why his actions have been shrouded in mystery for so long. So before we get into it, make sure to subscribe for more One Piece content every week. And even though none of you may ever get to eat a devil fruit like Luffy, you can eat something much better like HelloFresh, the sponsor for this video. Do you hate cooking? Do you hate grocery shopping? Do you hate planning meals? Do you hate doing work in general? If so, then you should be using HelloFresh, the meal prep service that delivers food straight to your door, giving you all the ingredients you need to quickly whip up a delicious meal with easy to follow recipes that can be done in 15 minutes. That means no more time wasted going to grocery stores, no more stress of spending an hour cooking after a long day of work. HelloFresh makes everything simple while still tasting really good. The meals are delicious with a wide variety of options, over 30+ recipes a week, and there are fit and wholesome recipe options that let me eat healthy while still eating tasty meals. And the best part is, you can get 65% off HelloFresh plus free shipping today. Just go to HelloFresh.com and use code MrMorge65 for 65% off plus free shipping. That's HelloFresh.com, code MrMorge65 for 65% off and free shipping, link in the description below. So what we are first told about Kuma is that he was once known as an extremely violent pirate, an absolute tyrant. But this of course does not line up with the calm and measured Kuma that we actually meet. And in the brief flashback we see of a young Kuma, it seems that he was in fact a kind and gentle figure, and the revolutionaries actually refer to him as being very kind-hearted. However, to begin with, it is likely that Kuma's reputation as a violent pirate was entirely made up by the world government. After all, Kuma was the former king of Sorbet Kingdom. He was a king of one of the world government's nations, who then became a pirate. It is pointed out that this is something that the world government greatly resents, as it hurts the image of the world government as a whole. As such, it is likely that they pushed a particularly evil reputation onto Kuma, as the world government has done throughout history, to those that rebel. The supposed devils of Ohara being an excellent example, Kuma's initial reputation was likely pure propaganda. Now, at some point, Kuma joined the Revolutionary Army, which suggests that whatever reason he had for going from king to pirate in the first place was world government related. There is something that the world government must have done that made Kuma abandon his position as king, or they in some way forced him to abdicate the throne. And from then on, he lived as a pirate until he joined the Revolutionary Army to fight back against the world government for whatever injustice was done to him. Keep that in mind, as we'll be circling back to try and figure out the reason for his actions later on. So why did Kuma the Revolutionary submit to the world government? Why did he voluntarily become a warlord, and then a guinea pig for Vegapunk, and finally ultimately a mindless slave for the Celestial Dragons? This is something that he kept secret from the revolutionaries and even Dragon. They genuinely don't know what happened to him or why he has become a slave to the Celestial Dragons. So whatever reason it was is something that Kuma kept hidden even from his allies in the Revolutionary Army. This was likely something extremely personal, and the simple answer is simply Jewelry Bonnie, his daughter. We know that Jewelry Bonnie was held captive by the world government recently before the start of the story. Her escape was a huge deal for the world government. She seems to be someone extremely valuable to them, to the point that her escape supposedly sent a chill down Akainu's spine. Bonnie is incredibly important to the world government. Kuma's daughter was being held captive by the world government, and as we can tell Kuma loves his daughter, it's easy to understand why Kuma was essentially forced to follow the world government's every whim and command, so long as they had his daughter captive. Interestingly, Bonnie likely freed herself sometime shortly before the start of the story, as she is a member of the Worst Generation and became a noteworthy pirate in a short amount of time. Essentially, she is a contemporary of Luffy's. However, it seems the timing was unfortunate, as the world government had already begun experimenting with Kuma's body and likely his mind, such that by the time Bonnie escaped, it was too late for Kuma. Now he could never escape. Now this opens up two possibilities. First is the possibility that Kuma was openly rebellious against the world government in the first place. A king who chose to become a pirate and rebel against them, and as punishment the world government took Kuma's daughter and forced him to become their slave to protect her. Now this scenario doesn't provide any sort of a real reason as to why Kuma would initially rebel against the world government in the first place. Maybe there was some sort of separate trigger incident, but this scenario also doesn't account for the fact that it seems as though Bonnie herself is incredibly valuable to the world government. She is likely far more valuable than Kuma. So in that case, it makes the second possibility seem far more likely to me, that Bonnie was always extremely valuable to the world government for a certain reason. And it's possible that the world government simply took Kuma's daughter from him. Even when Kuma was the king of Sorbet Kingdom, the world government simply exercised their absolute power and took his daughter, the princess, for their own means. This is what led Kuma to abdicate the throne, leave the allied nations of the world government behind, become a pirate, and ultimately a revolutionary in the hopes of fighting against the world government. However, perhaps the world government ultimately recognized his weak point and brought him to heel by threatening to harm his daughter, which forced Kuma to give up and become their loyal servant in return for keeping Bonnie safe. And why would Bonnie be so important in the first place? The simple guess is of course her fruit. Maybe as a young child, the princess of Sorbet Kingdom, Bonnie inadvertently ate a fruit that was extremely valuable, something that the world government absolutely had to have control over, and so they even disregarded the fact that she was royalty of a kingdom and captured her. It's hard to say right now why exactly Bonnie's fruit is so important. The ability to control ages is of course extremely valuable on paper and could potentially grant eternal youth. However, most readers assume that Im is already immortal, as he has been seemingly making decisions for a long time. And the Gorosei seem replaceable enough that it wouldn't be exactly a desperate need of the world government to keep Bonnie around to always keep them young. If I were to hazard a guess, it's possible that Im may be immortal in that he may never die, but that may not be the same as perpetually maintaining his youth, and Bonnie's fruit may be necessary for that purpose, but even that seems like a bit of a stretch. On top of that, Akainu seemed to imply that the consequences of not having Bonnie in their clutches were terrifying, and Akainu does not know about Im. There is something valuable about Bonnie and her fruit that we have not quite figured out yet. But whatever it is, the world government is very scared of losing her. For all we know, it may be related to the fruit's awakening, but that's a theory for another time. The bottom line is that the Celestial Dragons clearly got a great double usage out of keeping Bonnie captive. They had in their hands the power of her fruit that is seemingly extremely valuable, and they got to have an obedient servant in Kuma, who they've turned into a mass-produced weapon of war, and who exists as a symbol of what happens when a king disobeys the gods. And finally, if we track Bonnie's story in parallel to Kuma's, she is repeatedly shown to have a deep-seated hatred for those who have done this to her and her father. At whatever point she escaped the world government, it was too late for her father to be saved. She watched the events of Marineford with Kuma in mind, and vowed to go to the New World to confront the man responsible. It is now apparent that the man she had in mind all along was Vegapunk. Even though she was seemingly recaptured briefly by Akainu, she has gotten away again and is back on track to finding Vegapunk and confronting him. And with that, the final reason I believe that the Kuma and Bonnie storyline is ultimately one of a father sacrificing everything for the sake of his daughter is because of a soft developing trend that we can see in One Piece that's taken shape after Oda had his own daughter. Oda has outright stated in interviews that before he had a daughter, he stayed away from drawing those type of family dynamics like father-daughter relationships in his manga since he wasn't sure what those were really like. But ever since having his own daughter, he now freely includes those type of stories in his works. Heroes and Rebecca is a great example of what he was talking about. It is one of the most personally emotional storylines for Oda in the entire story, and it featured a father who ultimately took all burdens on himself to protect his daughter. Film Red, which at least was conceptually thought up by Oda, is again centered around the father-daughter dynamic of Shanks and Uta. We even arguably got a twist on that loving father-daughter dynamic recently with Kaido and Yamato. Although in contrast, Yasue and Toko was one of the emotional centerpieces of the Wano arc. We can already see that the Bonnie and Kuma dynamic is something that is set to be very emotional and likely filled with tragedy. And the whole storyline of the mystery behind Kuma, a man who had strangely submitted to being a guinea pig for the world government, was something that was written into the story at a point where Oda himself was now a father. And of course, Bonnie was written into the arc directly after. I personally would not be surprised if the tragedy of Kuma ultimately comes down to a father doing everything he can, giving up everything, his crown, his body, his mind, all for the sake of keeping his daughter safe, which in turn has spawned this emotionally charged revenge arc of Bonnie, who has broken free of the world government, coming back around to fight back against them and save her father in turn. And bonus points if you believe that Bonnie is set to be the next Straw Hat, which I'm personally 50-50 on at the moment. This would in fact be the perfect setup for her to join the crew heading into the final conflict against the world government and the Celestial Dragons. So let me know if you agree with this history of Kuma in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this video then definitely like, comment, and subscribe, and you can get my extended thoughts on this and all future topics by becoming a member. Just hit the button below.